Bom dia, sejam bem-vindos ao segundo dia da Conferência Museus e Responsabilidade Social.
Good morning. Welcome to the conference of today with the subject of today's debate, social impact, new responsibilities, new metrics. We have a large number of guests, of speakers. I will speak to some of them in English. To the Portuguese speakers, I will speak in Portuguese. During the first panel, we have Pirjo Hamari and Krebs, Director for Social, Economic and Research Studies from the Museum of Louvre in Paris. Maria Amélia Coupertinho Miranda from the Coupertinho Miranda Foundation is going to present a long project. And Marie Briguli from Malta University, economist and teacher or professor in this university. Welcome all. I would like to draw your attention to the possibility in the platform after this first block for you to do a sort of one-to-one room with the speakers. Please use this functionality, this feature. And I would like to listen to the first speaker of this morning, Pirjo Hamari, who is going to speak about a European project, a MOI project, European project, self-assessment model for the museums.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to come here to this conference to talk about our European project, MOI Museums of Impact. In this project, we are looking at evaluation for impact. And to start with the presentation, I will show you what our project is about. So we are a Creative Europe program, a project that is currently running and will be running until November 2022. We are a consortium of 11 partners across Europe, and like stated in the beginning, what we are looking towards doing is providing the European museums with a self-evaluation framework that will help museums increase their impact in society. In practice, the project runs a series of workshops, both for its internal participants and also for outside stakeholders. And museums are included in these projects through a series of open stakeholder forums. And we are using all of this information that we are gathering in the workshops and in the open stakeholder forums for formulating a draft new model. And we should be in the stage where we have the first draft of this model finalized by the summer. And after that, we will run a series of pilots in different museums to test how this self-evaluation framework works. After receiving information from the pilots about the needed changes in the framework, we will finalize it through another series of workshops and eventually publish the model and disseminate information about it as widely as possible. It will be voluntary, free to use, and available openly to any museum interested in self-evaluation. In the spirit of today's conference and in light of everything that has been talked about yesterday, really wonderful presentations about the possibilities of museums to have an impact and to have a social responsibility and to be able to work with these questions in the society. We feel that our project addresses a very timely question about the capacity of museums to address these questions. We know that it's not easy to find your way among all this all this information and all these needs in society of where your place is and how best can you as an organization address these very important questions. And what this project aims to do is take a new approach in how to support museums in having more impact. And this self-evaluation is not so much about measuring, but developing the capacity of the museums for impact. It uses developmental self-evaluation as a tool, and through this process, it helps museums to identify areas of development and refocus their work in a way that creates more impact in society. And I think in this way, what we propose and the tool that we are creating fits very well into the framework of discussion about the complexities of working in a way where social relevance is at the core. I will explain some more about what we mean about developmental evaluation. And as this audience knows very well, there are many different approaches that you can take when you do an evaluation. There are conceptual differences between these approaches, just highlighting the fact that evaluation can be done in multiple ways and for multiple purposes. The most common way of thinking about evaluation is probably the outcome and impact evaluation, which examines the results of an intervention. And we all recognize that it's really important for museums and the cultural sector in general to have available these kinds of tools that can help us examine the results of an intervention, or to examine the impact that the museum organizations have in different areas. However, our project is targeting another area in evaluation. And like stated, our conceptual approach to evaluation is based on developmental evaluation. And developmental evaluation is an approach that basically emphasizes the role of service design or development. It's best suited to innovation, radical program redesign, to complex issues, or to solving crises. And in such situations, developmental evaluation can help by framing concepts or surfacing issues, highlighting issues that come from a complex background, but need to be highlighted in order to develop your activities. So basically, this means that this model does not measure, and it doesn't explain the outcomes that you have, but it focuses on the activities that you have. And in this way, it generates learning, evolution, and development. In summary, it goes from evaluating impact to evaluation for impact. Another way of looking at this is to place the targets or the activities of the project on the impact value chain. And here I use as an example the impact value chain created by Europeana. Impact value chain, which is one way of looking at the process of how change is made in society. The focus of the MOI evaluation framework is on the early end of the chain, on the things that we do. The model helps museums to analyze the early end, the things that they do, and identify areas where development is possible if the museum wants to increase its impact or its relevance, if it wants to analyze if the things that we do or the museum does are the right things in view of impact. So again, it shifts the focus of evaluation or assessment from doing the things right, which is about quality, to doing the right things, which is about impact. And just to give you a practical example, what we mean actually when we talk about a self-evaluation framework. I will provide you an example from the Finnish Museum's evaluation framework, which we have had in use already for several years. I will underline that this is only the starting point of the emerging European development framework for museum, but it gives you the idea, it gives you the principle of what we are talking about when we talk about an evaluation framework. So this model consists of a series of evaluation questions to be assessed against the status or the current situation of the museum in comparison to where the museum wants to be. These questions target issues that are recognized to be important in light of impact. And in this particular example, you can see some of the questions, and there is an example for example, an evaluation question asking the museum, number 5, the museum staff, stakeholders, customers, and communities know the museum's profile. And in this developmental evaluation, the museum is asked to self-evaluate whether you think this statement is true or false, or maybe, in other words, say that we haven't really thought about this that much, and we recognize that there is need for development in this area. To the scale saying, yes, we have thought about it quite a lot, and we can demonstrate that we have thought about this issue in a way that we think is sufficient. And going through this whole evaluation framework means that the museum can then recognize areas of development, and by developing these recognized areas, we can guarantee, or we hope, that the museum is then able to develop its activities, its performance towards having more impact. There's also an element of an internal dialogue included. It helps the organization to come together to agree on how each area is evaluated, and leading to shared insights on areas of how to develop. And it emphasizes defining your role, making choices, and setting goals as necessary steps in your development. And the model is structured under transversal evaluation areas, not individual museum processes, but wider topics. And these examples now on the screen come from the Finnish model, but we are working to revise them completely. And taking the step into the next slide, there is already a series of identified topics and areas where we are looking at the impact that the museums can create. And under these topics that are on the top of the screen now, we will develop those kinds of statements that help museums evaluate their own activities and identify areas, for example, under the topic of local community and dialogue, where changes made to the current situation lead to a situation where the museum can increase its impact. So in a summary, how the evaluation leads to development is that you have a process of dialogue with your own organization through the framework and addressing topics that are presented there. Using the framework, you identify areas where there is room for development, and based on the results of this joint discussion, you plan a development path using any range of development activities you think is suitable for the purposes, and you start the development path based on the evaluation results. And we believe that this is a usable tool for museums that are looking for increased impact. And going towards the end of my presentation about what our project is doing, we are, of course, closely monitoring what is done in other projects in this very important topic of museums and societal impact. And there are, of course, several ways of developing and adjusting your organizations to address the needs of the society. And we feel that we have identified an area where we are well complementary to many of the already existing systems that are used, either such systems that are necessary, for example, accreditation or registration, or maybe voluntary as quality models that fall within the same kind of category, or to the other end of the impact chain where we are accountable for our actions and we need to demonstrate or somehow show the possibilities and the end results of our activities in terms of impact. These two, I think we are, these are of course necessary for the museums, but we think that self-evaluation for development adds a third dimension to this equation of accreditation, accountability, and then tools for self-development in the organization. And we feel it's a very important point to make that we are not repeating or replicating or taking the place of any other development activity or development framework, but adding to the already existing and maybe complementing them in a way that will be useful for the museums who are looking towards their way in all this context of museums of impact and social responsibility. Because you can't really look for impact or expect impact if you have not considered what your goals are and if your organization is not capable of realizing these goals in the best possible way. Addressing the social role of museums is intimidating because it requires actively changing and stepping outside your traditional boundaries and comfort zones. Without this step, however, museums may not be able to stay relevant. And more than this, museums lose the huge potential they have in actively changing the world for the better. We feel that developmental self-evaluation can help, we hope, museums navigate better the development towards museums of impact. And this is the underlying philosophy of what this project is addressing. If you want to know more about our project, I invite you to get acquainted with our web pages, our Facebook page, and of course you are free to contact us at any time that you like. We'd be happy to talk to you further, and I will be available for the discussion session later. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pirjo. It was a very nice and very refreshing way to take a look at museums and the work. We're looking forward to see more results of your pilots and then forward to the next speaker. I would like to pass the word and the floor to Anne Krebs from the Louvre Museum in Paris. Anne Krebs, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much to Clara for the invitation. Thank you for the organization, and also thank you for the interpreters because they are doing a great job. I'm going to give you a very short talk because I would like to give the floor to my colleagues. I will address a twofold topic. Firstly, some issues for today's museums in terms of measurement of social responsibility. And then discussing the Louvre Museum experience in terms of evaluation by highlighting some results and theoretical path for research. Of course, we know that we need to define social responsibility for museums depending on their own characteristics and catchment area. And more importantly, there is a need to take into consideration the relevant evaluation principles and tools in accordance with their constraint system. Why is it important for me to highlight those dimensions? Because in fact, we have to deconstruct three categories of evaluation principles. The first category is our category of action, which people or audiences are concerned. But there is a second level, a second category of evaluation principle, which is the category of analysis. The respective objectives of managers, politicians, or researchers may be very different and even conflicting. To whom is evaluation intended for? And there is obviously a third category, which is the category of social practices. What are the cultural practices or the lack of practices within different communities belonging to our territory? And there is, to my opinion, a crucial need to analyze the non-cultural trajectories of the individual and to understand in what way people describe their relationship or lack of relationship to the arts and museums. From this point of view, museums' audiences today are probably overvalued, while there is a lack of knowledge about non-audiences. What are their leisure activities? How do they use the collective services of their territories? What are their constraint systems in terms economic, in terms of transportation, in terms of time? So it seems to me that it is very important to reverse the analysis, looking at social dynamics, opportunities, but also barriers. And yet, very importantly, the vast majority of museums cannot feel the responsibility of evaluation alone, because it requires financial means, it requires human resources and skills suited to research. And this question is all the most important. But the reluctance to implement research program is also a political question that needs to be addressed. It could be therefore really relevant to create research networks like the MOI project, networks among museums in partnership with local university or research centers. My second point is linked to the Louvre Museum experience in terms of research and evaluation. Firstly, what we establish at the Louvre, and it's the most obvious principle, it's important to define our social responsibility in accordance to our territory, audiences and non-audiences at an international and national level. For example, by producing a performance report including social and educational targets, notably for local audiences. As for an example, the Louvre have had a lot of long-term partnership on this territory, on the Île-de-France region, with schools, hospitals, social agencies, or even prisons. My second point, what is very important to my opinion, is a systematic cross-analysis combining qualitative and quantitative research as a principle using action research. It is also very important to have a joint construction of our evaluation tools by the museum experts and closely with our partners. And lastly, it is also very important to analyze the process of our activities and programs as much as the result themselves, and analyzing the impact of our actions on audiences and staff. What are some relevant results of our research programs? The first one, and it was really important for the Louvre Museum staff to discuss this point. We have sometimes diverging objectives. The original objectives of museums programming are numerous and sometimes quite unclear or contradictory compared to those of our partners. And our objectives in terms of programs are frequently too ambitious. We should rather give priority to more modest goals. As people told it to us, we just need to open a parenthesis in our lives. We just need to provide a breath of air to our audiences. And this is already sufficient in terms of effects. And also, it is very important to have in mind that we need to give priority to those short-term ambitions, improving people's well-being here and now without hoping any magical transformation of people or behaviors. The second point is the concern for the value of our cultural activities. There is very often an uncertainty as to the status of cultural activities. Is culture conceived by our partners and audiences as a central or a secondary activity? Is it only occupational? How do we improve and assess concretely and symbolically the value of participation to cultural activities? I shall give an example to you. When researching with our partners in the French prisons, inmates taking part to our programs ask to value their participation through possible reduction of sentences in order to assess the value of the programs. My third point is the need to overcome some bias and exclusion phenomena. There are unconscious principles of self-exclusion in participation to our activities. People are intimidated, they feel incompetent, they express a lack of interest. But there are also explicit selection bias to participation by our partners, and it leads to a tension. We would like to search for equity in terms of participation, but selection bias may be suggested by the partners in order to ensure the success of the program. A nurse in an hospital told me, I'm going to select the pick of the patients because it was very important for her to assess the success of the program. And you have to have in mind this self-exclusion or selection bias to participation. We also have to bring in light, and we did it with the professional staff of the Louvre. We have to assess and evaluate the professional and managerial impact of our activities on staff. Because even staff participating to our program are capable to get some distance from work and social condition. They are capable to acquire new skills from a personal but also professional perspective. And most importantly, they gain time for themselves in a time where there is overwork, and also in many countries in Europe, staff reductions. And there is, of course, an important symbolic impact of the museum contribution we have to evaluate. Because when you participate to a program with other facilities, there is another perspective given to those facilities, prisons, hospitals, employment bodies. There is a clear image enhancement of those bodies, but it also gives another perspective on Louvre Museum itself, because it is more accessible and more close to people. And more importantly, we assess the fact that cultural activities contribute to restore something very simple but almost ordinary relationship between people, and they contribute to reduce social stigmatization. What are the limitations of the programs? The first one, and it will be very obvious for you, it is the conclusion of the program, because our partners are they have a feeling of abandonment when you are working with them for 2, 3, or 4 years and you leave them. And the conclusion of the program is a very difficult moment for ourselves and the partners. And the second obvious limitation, and it is clearly a problem today, the budget reduction that we are going to see in terms of development of programs. I would like to give to you some elements in terms of research paths, which seems to me to be very important for the Louvre and beyond. I think there is a need to create new measurement scales really adapted to the cultural experience. To my opinion, there is a very poor contribution of the traditional marketing tools, satisfaction measurement, or key performance indicators. There is a priority to measure the variety and the complexity of the benefits derived from the cultural experience, social, cognitive, aesthetic, psychological, and even therapeutic. It is important in that way to establish joint evaluation networks and to combine the forces among different museums within their territories. It is also very challenging and essential today to analyze the complete field of the contemporary cultural experience, which means creating together new measurement tools and competencies that are needed in order to analyze the real and virtual consumption practices and their crossing. And yet importantly, it is very important today to support the research function of museums and galleries in order to strengthen and fight for the legitimacy of museums as knowledge bodies and social bodies as well, at a time when there is an overall loss of authority and credibility of our traditional media, political, governmental, and even scientific bodies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm quite astonished by your presentation. It's a lot to digest. We're looking forward for your paper. Maybe then we can analyze it better. Nonetheless, the challenge you propose is quite big to set up this new joint collaboration for research in museums all over Europe. Sounds like a great idea to continue. So passing to the next person, Maria Amélia Cupertino Miranda, da Fundação Dr.
From the Cupertino Miranda Foundation. She'll be talking to us about a specific project. You have 15 minutes. Your project's a bit longer, so focus on the most important. For those who are following after this session, there will be the possibility of speaking to each one of the speakers one-on-one. All right, so you have the floor. Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me well? Good morning. I greet all the participants and to Professor Clara Camacho for inviting me, invitation addressed to me by the Directorate General of Cultural Heritage, which is an honor to me. It was a pleasure to be here today representing the Foundation under the theme Museums and Social Responsibility to speak about the importance of measuring the social impact of the financial education projects of Paper Money Museum. The museum is managed by the Foundation, which is a private, non-profit institution with headquarters in Portugal, and shares with the Foundation the mission of contributing to the knowledge society and social cohesion. The museum and the Foundation have always seen themselves as social entrepreneurs. In other words, they feel with responsibility the society and seek to identify social benefits in order to provide more effective and lasting answers than those that already exist. This means that they are committed with social innovation. But I would like to underline that all programming always starts with the museum collections. It is possible to talk about all the financial education projects of the museum currency paper. I have chosen the project In Saving is Gain because it is pragmatic. Today, I will focus on the project, the ambition, and how it evolved over the last 5 years. In conclusion, I would like to demonstrate that the project is not only effective in terms of social change, but that it fulfills the objectives of the mission of the museum and the foundation. In 2008-2009, an action research project was carried out with the University of Porto, guided by Professor Alice Semedo. It was entitled The Territorialization of a New Paradigm in Education, to understand better what was the relationship that the Foundation and the museum should have with the surrounding schools, what practices could be improved, establishing sustainable relationships in order to address issues of financial and social inclusion. The project identified a serious social deficit, a deficit of financial literacy among professors, students of the primary and secondary schools. This took place before the launch of the Financial Literacy Survey made in 2010, which ratified our discovery, the financial literacy deficit. This was the starting point for the design of the project within the schools in Porto in 2009-2010. Given the economic and social crisis, the need to design a financial education project was an immediate decision taken by the Foundation's Board of Directors. The program was designed by the Education Service team in collaboration with the Faculty of Economics of Porto University. I would like to highlight two facts that I consider essential to ensure the continuity of this type of project. There is a need for the work to be carried out by the university top members. Otherwise, projects with this dimension and need run the risk not to be able to be put in place in the field. When crossing the mission of the foundation, the theme of the museum, the evidence gathered by the aforementioned research project, the board of directors did not hesitate and recognized the need to design a financial education project that would be not only an empowering, well-structured, and transforming program that could generate social change. In short, I will describe the solution of the problem. It is a continuity project, collaborative, built with the teachers, implemented in schools throughout the school year, intended to professors and to teachers and students from all education cycles. The focus are transfer of financial knowledge, development of skills, change of attitudes and behaviors based on informed and financially correct decisions. The project provides various resources ranging from accredited teacher training, booklets for students and teachers, and access to an educational platform of e-learning that has a lot of contents such as concepts, challenges, lesson plans, games, and worksheets, materials that the students can work either in the school or in the family household, allowing to put in place the project. It also provides online visits and has a support line to the teachers. Organizes 3 annual events: the World Savings Day, the Global Money Week, and a final presentation of works for evidence of the knowledge that are acquired. The project of this size and complexity is not implemented without a vast network of partners, such as the Faculty of Economics of the University of Porto, which is the guarantor of the scientific credibility of the project contents, the Directorate General for School Establishments in the North, the Bank of Portugal, the Portuguese Insurers Association, and public and private investors. This project was supported by the Portugal Innovation Social Innovation through the European Social Fund. What is the ambition of the project in terms of change? To tackle the financial literacy deficit very clearly is and will be the creation of a new generation of people financially more informed. So ambition was always there because the museum is aware that there is a need to involve teachers, parents, companies, academic institutions, the media, and political decision makers. There is a need to reach the political decision makers because otherwise nothing change. As you know, public policies has to be influenced in order to be able to create conditions so that projects of this nature can provoke a change. The project evolved, but has always had this ambition to be part of an international strategy. And in fact, this ambition was correct at international level. Financial education is recognized by the OECD, the World Economic Forum, in its report of March 2016 as being one of the 5 key skills for the students of the 21st century. From this project, Portugal has taken steps in this direction. The National Council of Financial Supervisors created a National Financial Education Plan in 2011. The financial education benchmark was designed in 2013, and the Ministry of Education changed the national curriculum, making the financial education compulsory in 2018 in 2 of the 3 cycles of basic education. This has to be said. This is the evidence of the proof of the relevance that the role that the museum plays in society, and that it is a project designed by the museum capable of bringing change and social innovation. How is the project territorialized? In 2009-2010, started to be tested in three schools in Porto. In 2010-2015, the project didn't leave Porto City, but was extended to 7,100 students, 348 classes, and 2010 schools. Involved 17 municipalities from the Porto metropolitan area, but the expansion of the project took place from 2017-2020, reaching outstanding figures. The project had the involvement of more than 18,000 students, 925 classes, 533 schools is put in place in 34 municipalities from 5 regions in the north region of Portugal. The first measurement of social impacts took place in 2015-2017. It was developed by the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences of Porto University under the coordination of Professor Rui Seródio. This study was implemented in children and teachers of the first cycle primary schools, 44 schools, 103 schools, 136 classes. In global terms, the evidence gathered shows that the project had a positive social impact. First, regarding a number of predefined set of skills which show that the children who participated in the program are now more able to take and identify appropriate decisions in different common dilemmas in the daily management of financial resources. But more than that, showed or proved that there was an increase in family relationships, started to understand their parents better, started to realize that sometimes they couldn't buy some things, and the empathy that existed in the family increased. And I would like to underline that fathers and mothers say that these changes took place. The second measurement took place from 2017-2020. The objective was to see if this had a positive impact with the youngsters that participated. This time, the target population was of 17,000 students distributed by the 5 regions of north of Portugal. Specific objectives of social impact, targets, and indicators were defined. First goal, improve financial literacy skills in 60% of beneficiaries. Indicator 1, significant difference between pre-test and the post-test in beneficiaries. Goal 2, to improve math scores in 1 mark in 20% of the participant students with the indicator difference of 1 mark. The verification of this impact was defined into general dimensions: promotion of financial literacy skills, improvement of the school results in mathematics. Given the large size of the target population, it was defined that the measurement studies would be carried out by representative sampling. There was a research group randomly selected, the classes that constituted the control group and the experimental group. there is the statistic evidence of an interaction between participation or not in the program and in the improvement of these skills. This improvement was assessed by comparing the two assessment of financial literacy skills, the pre and post test. The scientific evidence collected showed that 62.23% of children showed positive changes in their financial literacy skill, and that 22.87% of students improved their grade in mathematics in one score. But what strongly evidences the high impact potential in the project are those that are related to the improvement of financial literacy skills. The social impact measurement concluded that the success of it is due to a set of substantial changes that were introduced in the project: diversity and quality of the psychopedagogical tools given to teachers to implement them on the ground in the field, further guidance given to them, and also this is a measurement study employing an experimental methodology. It was a unique study for several reasons, such as focus in financial literacy, both in terms of number of participants and its territorial coverage. The conclusion of the measurement of social impacts, in the opinion of Professor Rui Serodio, he was the scientific coordinator of the team. The aims or the goals that have to do with the mission of the foundation through the project were clearly achieved across the board. The question now is the following one: why is it indispensable to measure social impact? The foundation invested a lot of time, money, energy, human resources in these and other financial education projects. And therefore, the question is as follows: the project, is it effective? To get the answer to this question, it is important to measure. The measurement of the social impact is essentially targeted to verify if the project generated a certain value or social change, and if that happened, if that change was a positive or negative change. And today, how is the project? The pandemic proved that more than ever there is a need to change and to take care of the economy and the lives. As a result of the pandemic, there was a need to start again to find effective answers, and COVID-19 brought this positive. It has accelerated digital transition. In 2021, a new project is born, NPEG 4.0, fully digital, allowing to cross financial information and digital empowerment of teachers, to reinforce personal contacts, to reinforce the e-learning platform. We created an online visit to the Paper Money Museum, and we invested in the reinforcement of communication, namely dynamization of social networks and a monthly newsletter. We are broadcasting via streaming all big events. The objectives of these decisions focus on economic sustainability and social inclusion, which for me are key issues in this decade. Now I would like to show you the achievement indicators for 2021 because the project expanded. So we have outstanding figures: more than 9,000 students, 478 classes, 200 schools. In terms of total figures, the project covered since the beginning more than 39,000 students, more than 1,900 classes, and more than 1,000 schools. It is put in place in 39 municipalities that make up the metropolitan area of Porto and 5 other important regions in Portugal, and also Madeira region. To end or to conclude, I think I can say that the project is effective, reduces the financial literacy deficit, contributes to a more cohesive society because it is creating a new generation that is more financially empowered and consequently happier. To underline the importance of financial literacy, I would like to quote Professor Ana Maria Lusardi, who says, financial literacy is today as important as being able to read and write. There is no time to waste. I believe that increasingly financial education should be part of the recovery plan of the recession caused by the pandemic and part of the toolkit we use to move forward and to be better prepared for the future. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. You exceeded a little your time, but you really needed to present this final stage of the project. Financial literacy of the Portuguese population is key. Thank you as well for this long project, 11 years of work, a project that started with research and action.
About the new insights from behavioral economics from the University of Malta. Mary Brulio, you're quite welcome. The floor, digital floor, is all yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Very good. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here in this panel on the social impact on museum actions. I've very much enjoyed listening to the other contributions, even yesterday. And I would like to congratulate the organizers for tasking us with keeping it brief. As an economist, I'm a firm believer that long talks quickly run into diminishing returns. And as a behavioral economist, I add that they come at the cost of something very precious, which is our attention. So let me quickly introduce myself. I am an economist working in the field of market failure and policy intervention. And I draw a lot from behavioral economics in my work. I have worked in policymaking for many years before returning to academia. And I continue to work with policymakers and civil society as an academic. Much of my work is very applied. So with my 15 minutes, let me jump right into my contribution. My first point is that studies on the economic value of a sector or an activity often start from the premise that value may be inferred from market-based achievements. I mean, when people buy something, this indicates on their part a willingness to part with money and indirectly with their time, because that's how they obtain the money, to obtain something that is at least as valuable as the money needed to procure it. In a sense, if you like, every time we buy something, we give up a little piece of ourselves to obtain that something else. And scaling up, the sum of all these transactions in a year in all markets create what we value in the economy, or what we call gross domestic product, GDP. And so very often, at least the starting point of trying to understand the economic contribution of a sector, let's say the cultural sector or even museums specifically, is to try and understand sort of the sum total of people's willingness to pay for it, or the sum total of what it generates in the market. And then we do sophisticated stuff with that, like we calculate multiplier effects, or we calculate percentages, contribution to other sectors like tourism, and so forth. Now, of course, we're all quite well aware, as economists and beyond, that going about thinking of economic value merely as contribution to GDP is a little bit of a leap of faith. For instance, we know that what is bought and sold in the market does not always align with positive value for society. Let's say cigarette purchases, for example, form part of market activity, contribute to GDP, make the economy look good, but they're not necessarily a good thing. Resource depletion, by the same token, extracting resources and selling them is not necessarily a good and sustainable thing, but it contributes positively to GDP. The second problem, which we're all quite well aware of, is that there's a lot which is valuable, which does not appear in GDP. Even economic activity itself, which, however, is not monetized. For example, housework, for example, environmental benefits, and oftentimes, for example, museums. So various activities tend to fall outside the realm of market transaction, either because they have no private ownership, so they're not traded, there's no property rights attached, or simply because they fall in the realm of the social rather than the market. And museums are often considered a public good, one where it is not really possible to transact and profit from, which is why they are oftentimes publicly funded, which is why we need to do the kind of studies that we've just heard about in the previous speaker to assess their impact. They're not alone to occupy this realm. Public gardens, transportation to remote communities, non-profitable hospital services. We can think of many other domains which yield value, which is not easily translated from the market. And of course, this tends to pose problems for economists trying to infer a monetary value for something which is not clearly bought and sold. It is, again, a similar problem when we try to infer a monetary value for a landscape or for protecting the climate or protecting water bodies. When we're trying to infer a monetary value to understand the value that people attribute to something in monetary terms, we resort to other means. So what are the means that we economists typically resort to? Well, we create, again, a hypothetical market. We try to understand what people would be willing to pay if museums were to be actually market-based activities. Alternatively, we try to understand what parts of themselves people are giving up in order to get their museum experience. For example, the time they spend, the transportation cost, and somehow we obtain a proxy of what museums would be valued at were they to have a market presence and market exchange. That's by way of introduction of sort of the more traditional approach that economists would at least start with when thinking of the value that museums contribute. So what changes with insights from behavioral economics, which is the point that I want to contribute to this panel today? Well, firstly, one of the main premises of behavioral economics is that even if markets were to be perfectly functional and people were to be making these buy and sell decisions and exposing their innate value for something, we now know through very well documented research that there are certain predictable biases and heuristics which ordinary humans and not the perfect, all-seeing, all-thinking, assumed human that we often model behavior with, that ordinary humans actually tend to make some mistakes when they make market-based, when they make decisions as to what to buy. For example, we would, or rather, whereas in ordinary economics, we would assume that people think out their decisions, really express their value in the market for something when they exchange their hard-earned money for it. Through behavioral economics and the body of research, we have come to understand that there are systematic errors that people make when they conduct these exchanges. For instance, people tend to gravitate towards decisions which are easy, which maintain the status quo. They tend to stick with default options. They tend to make decisions based on what they see, what is available in their decision landscape, not going beyond that. That which is salient, which is visible, which sounds, smells, or looks good, tends to unduly influence their decisions. People tend to be influenced by others. They tend to favor the here and the now. And this kind of myopia can negatively affect their choices, not when measured against some ideal, but when measured against that which they themselves want. In other words, people may somehow not actually act upon their own preferences, swayed by these biases and heuristics. What this then suggests is at least two things. First of all, it suggests that even observing values in market-based exchange is no guarantee that we are really observing what these people truly want. There may be some significant departures in their decisions. Secondly, it also suggests that when we are presenting people with hypothetical markets in order to extract this hidden value, this may not necessarily be the best way to go. For if people are already making mistakes in real markets, we can also assume that they will make mistakes in hypothetical markets. And in fact, we know that they make greater mistakes when they are imagining this kind of hypothetical scenario. It also suggests, perhaps more directly to museum managers and policymakers, that if we want to attract citizens, consumers to museums, then we have to think of such users not just as rational cost-benefit thinking individuals, but rather as people who are swayed by these situational or, let's say, choice infrastructure. So, for example, if we want to reach out to real people, then we would need to go to them, rather expect them to come to us, because that makes it easier. Primes, anything from nice smells to warm food and drink, will make a difference. Social norms, so Instagram-ready spaces in museums, or commitment devices that bind people to stick to their original intent, like season tickets. These are all examples of how behavioral economics can inform the day-to-day, let's say, management of a museum, but also policy making for museums. And in fact, we heard yesterday, for example, Molly Fannin talking about how they are working with behavioral scientists to understand what works and what doesn't. So back to my original point, trying to infer value of museums by simply looking at market-based activity is going to lead us astray, not just because the market fails to reveal value, but also because people themselves may fail to act upon that which they value. Now, the other aspect which I want to bring in from behavioral economics, it's very hard to bring in all the contributions that a discipline can make to understanding the value of museums, but I'm choosing this as one of the key things I want to contribute to this conference, is that there is a very thriving body of research within behavioral economics, which is dedicated to understanding another type of socioeconomic benefit, not GDP, not market-based activity, but actually well-being. And the quest to define, to measure, to understand the determinants of well-being has now resulted in a very rich literature, which also sheds light on that which gives value. I don't want to spend long, I'm aware of my time, but I really want to let you know what this could mean for museums, or elaborate a little bit on this. For instance, we now know that it's possible to measure well-being in various ways. One of the most frequent way to do this is simply to ask people how they feel with their lives, how happy they've been, and so forth. We also know a lot about the determinants of well-being, the conditions that forecast whether people will feel good or bad. For example, we know good health, sufficient income, employment. We know the relationship between age, gender, education, and well-being. We know about personality traits and how these translate to well-being. In my own research, I also assess how engagement in the arts affects well-being. So what this suggests is that cultural participation broadly, museum engagement more specifically, just like employment, just like good health, indeed like income, contributes something to well-being. It does so to different extents, but there is an equivalence that can be derived. In fact, through studies which model the determinants of well-being, it's now possible to say something like the presence of museums contributes the equivalent of, let's say, €3,000 worth of income per year. Both these aspects contribute to well-being, and this is how they are equivalent to each other. And as these studies of well-being increase, so does well-being increasingly make it to the policy-making agenda. Canada, New Zealand, Iceland, Bhutan, the OECD, the UN, and in Malta too, we have embarked on a very ambitious project entitled the Malta Wellbeing Index Project, with a view to informing evidence-based policy where well-being and not GDP is the economic endgame. To conclude, what does all this mean for museums? Well, for me, it suggests a need to refocus the question on the socio-economic value of museums beyond its sort of traditional, well, it contributes this much to tourism, this much to GDP, this many jobs, and so forth, rather to looking directly at what museums are contributing to well-being. And not just their direct contribution to well-being, but also their indirect contribution by boosting those other aspects which also contribute to well-being. So if, for example, museums are also contributing to mental health or to physical health or to any agenda like environmental protection, then indirectly they are also contributing to well-being in that way. Indeed, I would hazard to say, just by way of a very quick conclusion, that the very concept of well-being is one that museums can explore in their collections to shine a light on the increasing importance of the phenomenon itself.
It was a lovely presentation and a big challenge, kind of a poetics. How can we understand the well-being and how can we measure it? It's a huge challenge. Maybe we can fold it up with Anne Krebs' challenge to set up a network. Maybe we can have two-fold situations. Now, thank you so much for your presentation. Now we'll have a small pause, small break. We'll be back at 11. Please, I would like to remind you again, there is a one-to-one room if you want to continue the dialogue with our speakers. Hope to see you soon at 11. Thank you.
Hello, good morning once again. Welcome to the second part of the topic of social impact in museum action, new approaches and new metrics. We have with us today three more speakers, José Sosnes of the Portuguese Observatory of Cultural Activities, who will be speaking next, who will give us a synthesis on public studies in Portugal, some reflections, and the coming steps for the post-pandemic context. José Sosnes, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I congratulate the organization of the conference and the invitation, and the colleagues at the table, and all speakers, and all those who are following us via video conference. Just some brief initial notes to say that I am in a perspective of sociology of culture in proximity with public policies and cultural management. It is within this realm that I've carried out my activity and the activity of the observatory. The base is the the report of the group of museum projects in the future, coordinated by Clara Camacho. I use the notion of public in the broad sense with the different modes of relationship with the population and museum institutions. I will give specific attention to three instruments which, articulated, will allow for a better knowledge of these relationships of population with museum institutions, the statistics of visitors, studies of the effect of public, and questionnaires to the population, and organize the communication in two different stages that follow the title that I've chosen. Now, very brief reflections on these studies. We know that the relationship of cultural institutions with the audience is a complex and multidimensional reality and dynamic as well, whose knowledge demands a permanent study so as to inform policies and management practices and to inform practices by professionals and also irrigate knowledge to societies as a whole. The statistics of visitors. Let me highlight that Portugal has official statistics since the 60s, so it allows us to follow in a long series about the evolution, and the central tutelage of museums makes available information on its museums since the mid-90s, which is also a very relevant series to follow, specifically the sub-universe of museums in Portugal regarding the study of effect of public as a concern of public policies. What seems important is that we have arrived late and that the perspective arrived late in Portugal. And in fact, only in the decade of 2010 can we talk about a political measure with a significant reach and public studies of 40 national museums, even though we had carried out other studies, part of them gathered in a book, The 50 Years of L'Amour de l'Art, dates, critiques, and challenges, in which we try to see the influence of this work, particularly, but in general, of Pierre Gaudier in the study of audience in museums. In terms of evaluation, if we take a look at this, the conclusion is also that it is almost its complete non-existence. One of the most recent studies was carried out within the observatory under the temporary exhibition in the National Museum of Archaeology on studies and as a measure of public policy of culture. It's important to refer that Portugal does not have a study on cultural practices of the population. The available source is the Eurobarometer, and already from 2017, it is a very important instrument, especially at a European comparative scale. But then when we're talking about national realities, and as we know, it has several limitations. In other words, we don't have a study that allows us to assess the demand compared to the public policies of culture in the several domains of intervention that can assess between articulations between programs and policies and the impact with the public and the population from a more general perspective. And all this has already been highlighted in an excellent way in the colleagues from the previous table. On the other hand, there is a very strong interest by professionals regarding knowledge of the public, and this interest is perceived very well besides the quantification of the entrances. And on the other hand, there's a very significant work in academic works on scientific areas on several museum institutions. Very brief remarks on the supply. We know that museums and heritage are the mains of public policies, also in Portugal, I would say, both from the point of view of national museums that are of several types, even though predominantly of art, as well as the National Museum Panorama. And from this point of view, let me highlight the program of the Portuguese Museum Network, which was created in 2000, and that is aimed at all types of museums and tutelages as long as they are non-for-profit. On the other hand, from the supply, let me highlight that the number of museums has seen a very expressive growth over the last few decades. In this brief summary, what we know about the public and their relationship with museums. In spite of the scarcity of studies, we know quite a lot in spite of all this, and we are well informed about these studies and research carried out in the several countries regarding this reality. Very, very briefly, we know that the quantity of visitors, in other words, entrance, has increased very expressively, besides the demand as well. And this is due especially to foreign visitors in function of the growth of tourism. Since 2015, the foreigners are the majority. They were the majority until last year in the Portuguese museums. We know the predominant social profiles, and they are qualified with a lot of schooling and social professional activity. They correspond to the new middle classes. We also know that there are very big inequalities socially in access to museums. We know the profiles of the relationship with each one of the museums studied and museums in general. We generically know the motivations for the visit. We know the social context of the visit. We know that in many museums, the school public are an important component, relatively stronger in municipal museums. And on the other hand, we also know that 1/4 of, or in other words, only 1/4 of the Portuguese population visited a museum in the last 12 months. In other words, very far from the EU average. Three brief notes before going to the new stages to highlight the drastic decrease of the number of visitors because of the pandemic, a decrease which is naturally variable, but as a standard is run about between 70 and 80%. We know that visitors are almost reduced to national visitors, and we have seen an important valuing of the digital transition from the point of view of supply that is observable and verifiable, and supposedly also the demand, the public, which from my point of view needs verification. So, regarding the next steps, let me highlight that they are referred in a detailed way in the report of the project group of museums that is under the tutelage of the Ministry of Culture in Portugal. These proposals are extendable generically to museums in Portugal, and they should be considered both in the sense of acquiring new instruments, but also let me draw your attention to the need of reinforcing the already existing instruments. As a footnote, I would say that maybe too frequently we abandon or weaken projects that are deemed adequate. from the point of view of those next steps, almost coming to conclusion, let me highlight a generic approach in a perspective of a program of public policy in culture, and with continuous monitoring, not because we want to do everything in one go. It's not possible. We know that very well. But to highlight the importance of defining goals and bearing in mind the assumptions and to plan what is important to be done. In that sense, it seems fundamental to have this idea of public policy program aiming for a continuous monitoring and regular assessment and the projection of publics of each museum and Portuguese museums as a whole. A program which will include the assessment of the efficiency of social impacts, the cultural ones, economic, educational in people, communities, and society. This perspective of communities has been emphasized, but has more weight with the pandemic crisis, with a perspective that is aimed at national museums necessarily, here in the perspective of democratization of culture, but also the museums of the Portuguese network of museums, which is heterogeneous universe with diverse typologies. So an approach that is closer to the notion of the cultural democracy that was very well mentioned by the coordinator of the National Plan of Arts. And also the impacts of the digital transition in its relation with public exhibitions, other digital contents, online social networks that can be in mind social inequality and access, and the need to articulate knowledge with the measures to be adopted to mitigate these inequalities, and also bearing in mind the participative processes put in place in many museums. And of course, for such, the program should include the reinforcement of the instruments that already exist in the national statistics and those specific of the tutelage of culture that should also be placed in this perspective. This instrument should also be placed when we refer to the immovable heritage, since Portugal does not have statistics for this heritage. In the observatory, we have been working with this aim, and we hope to continue giving this contribution. And finally, as well, the importance of starting a line of studies on cultural practices of the population. It's a very important instrument, it's already been mentioned, to understand how the relationship is in the several regions regarding the several types of museums, regarding the several practices of leisure and culture. So it is a very powerful tool to frame our knowledge and public policies. And then, of course, all this with the involvement of the museum professionals and the tutelage and the research centers. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you, Professor José Soares Neves. You were brilliant in sticking to time. You still have a few minutes. Let me just highlight that we are at your disposal in the one-to-one rooms for the speakers who were present during the first and second panel to talk with the people on the platform. I think there hasn't been a lot of addition. I don't know how to instigate for you to take advantage of this possibility on top of the table, and has not been enjoyed fully. Let me pass the floor now to Olivia from the University of Sorbonne, Paris.
Olivia, I hope you're there. You're going to talk to us about the production of museum data and how the public can be a central for this data as a new indicator and an active, engaged participant in this, providing this new data for museums. So, Olivia, the floor is yours, please.
So, good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to say how pleased I am to participate in this discussion today. And I would obviously like to thank all the organizers of these 2 days of intense and stimulating reflection. The subject we are tackling today is not a particularly easy one because it brings together two complex objects, the museum and its statistic in the production of data on this field, that is obviously difficult to understand. Indeed, the museum itself is difficult to define, forming a population of studies that is not very homogeneous on a global scale. Behind the uniqueness of the word museum lies a diversity of museum forms in the world, with multidimensional criteria of format, function, object, themes, audience, budget, legislative aspect, and so on. Moreover, we know that there is about 95,000 museums in the world today. So beyond these particularly incredible figures and the dynamism that it induces for the museum field, coupled with the development of mass tourism and the geographical diversification of museums, what we should take into account is the diversity and the complexity of the museum phenomenon. The world of museum can appear difficult to apprehend by a quantified approach, but it's necessary to describe and to represent it. And we know the growing importance of these numbers for the orientation of the public and cultural policies and for the economic evaluation of culture. So here, I would like to bring some little reflection on the process of production of museum data and what this means for the construction of the public, which is considered as a beneficiary of museum in this process. And perhaps in some ways, this approach can question the way the museum develop in the world. So to begin with, I would like to quote the rather amusing reflection of Vincenzo Castrelli, who was an ambassador at the League of Nations and who presented in 1935 a report about museum and statistics to the board of directors of the International Office of Museum, which was the forerunner of ICOM. He said statistics should be limited to a few incidental data, such as the price of admission to museums, the number of persons employed in them, receipt and expenditure. The number of visitors itself will not be of great importance as an indication of a higher or lower level of intellectual life. Obviously, we first note some reluctance specific to the time to apply the laws of statistics to the world of museum, attached to a notion of worker spirit and intellectual activity. And the public does not constitute the core of museum activities. The indicators defined in this report are mainly related to the question of the collection. But what I found quite interesting was the fact that the only way to describe the public was from the question of the number of entries and from the attendance. Maybe because it was the easiest way to make measurement based on ticketing data. If it was not considered useful at the time, today we see the extremely importance of attendance data just by looking at the various rankings of exhibition and museum based only on their attendance figures, which give obviously a focus just on the museum superstars, which are a short number of museums that concentrate the masterpieces and the visitors. Of course, today, the question of the public is now not limited to museum or exhibition attendance. There are different types of data that can be collected using specific methodology through ticketing data from questionnaire or interview. But they all highlight the place of the public at the heart of the scientific and cultural project in the dynamic reinforced by the new museology movement in the 1980s. So these data are not neutral. The audience studies have become the main indicator of the vitality of the museum and an argument of legitimacy with the decision-making authorities. This diversity of objective and method associated with the diversity of the actors who are responsible for this production of data raises some question. What happens when we try to have a global view? At the European level, for instance, in the context of trying to harmonize the data collection, what do we find? When we look at the data presented by Eurostat, the European Statistical Office, the only accurate data only about museums themselves comes from EGMUS, the European Group on Museum Statistics. And without great surprise, since the data are hardly harmonized at the European level, it is the 5 most frequented museum per country. The works of EGMUS is also significant. We can just look at the data collected in the annual questionnaire and inspired a lot of statistical offices that need to create the methodology to have data. We can note that out of 34 categories of questions, 15 are related directly or indirectly to the audience. This may appear to be a significant proportion, but the question of the public is not addressed on many questions in a frontal manner. The public appears directly in the question and indicators related to visits, but also on the number of educational programs. But many questions concern just the equipment that could be used by the public, like the website. And more generally, what we can say is that the attendance figures are the most widely spread at the international level. And audience surveys that introduce really the voice of the public within the production of museum data. They exist, but to a lesser extent. So I would like to stress our 2 points here is that the audience data are not the only data that make up the public data world, but they are particularly present and established at completely diverse scales. And above all, there is a sort of paradox where the data produced on the museum exists through the audiences, but is neither homogeneous on a global scale nor sufficient to describe the set of dynamics that cross the museum. And we have also this idea that the public is seen as visitors, which emphasize the idea that the museum is somewhere you can see something and bring us closer to the model of the museum exhibition, which recalls certain evolution about the status of the exhibition within the museum organization. So already with these tools, which we have mastered fairly well through the years, there is a need for coherence, for more data feedback, for clearer data structuring. But these methodologies for collecting, producing, and disseminating data are evolving, and they are not impervious to changes within society, nor to technological upheavals. This can lead to a shift in the relationship with the public, and this is certainly not insignificant. The first change concerned participation as described in the Participatory Museum by Nina Simon in 2010 and linked to the development of cultural rights. In a movement of gathering and integrating the population within the museum institutions appears a necessity to the participation, which constitute a general tendency in the society, in the cultural sectors, and here in the museum. It is no longer professional or researchers who define the trends, but mobilized citizens who feel at least concerned by this kind of subject and want to have a voice, to discuss, to share, to remix what they consume. This issue is sensitive in the production of knowledge about the museum. We have some reports on the future of the institution that include citizen consultation, particularly through digital platforms. So the indicators, but also the observation practices are changing, and the desire for efficiency in the public and cultural policies question what the visitor wants. And it's also an obviously linked to all the challenges raised by the measurement of social impact of the museum. It was the case, for instance, in the Museum 2020 report published by the Museum Association in 2013, and in the 21st Century Museum Mission report directed by Jacqueline Edelman for the Ministry of Culture in France and published in 2017. And we can have observed this trend in the methods of the creation of a new museum definition implemented by ICOM in 2019. In the 21st Century Museum report, for instance, a collaborative platform called Let's Imagine the Future of the 21st Century Together was open to the public for 6 weeks in 2015, and it recording 10,000 visits and thousands of contributions and votes around 3 questions concerning the reasons for visiting, the expectation of the public, and their involvement in museum life. The lexical analysis of the content and the votes highlighted 4 major themes that were important for the citizens. It was the accessibility and the free admission, the question of the transmission of values and social vocation, the renewal of the visiting experience, and finally, the question of digital technology. So the changes are profound, and the users, and by extension, the citizen, become an actor in the observation and prediction of cultural trend, and it creates a real community around museum, and it's far away from dimension of mass tourism. And the measurement of participation emphasized the qualitative manner of producing data. It was also the need of a real effort to think the change in the evaluation, also by including the question of the participation within public policies. However, this kind of work has some limits in terms of legitimacy and representativeness. In the context, for instance, of the report about the 21st Century Museum mission, the portrait of the contributors showed that far from illustrating social openness, the vast majority of the contributors were already close to culture, they were familiar with museum, or they were young professionals in the cultural sectors. Another question that could be raised among professionals when we are trying to implement this kind of methodology is like, is everyone entitled to contribute on this high stakes theme? We need to think about this question before implementing this kind of methodology too. But anyway, it gives us the vision of a social museum developed in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, which emphasize the social and the political role of the museum. The second change I will talk about quite quickly is the issue of big data, which could also modify the relationship with the public. Because with the development and exponential multiplication of digital data, big data have imposed themselves in the public and the political spheres. They create new business opportunities for the private sectors, and they also provoke reflection on the future of observation method and official statistics. They include data from information requests, newsletter subscription, social networking, digital marketing, interactive tool device, and so on. Museums have seized this opportunity, like the Dallas Museum of Art since 2013, and exploit them to welcome the public and to improve the visitor experience. But this data can also produce more relevant and up-to-date statistics than traditional sources of official statistics. And this is what the EGNOS group tends to think by inaugurating this question in the 2019 annual meeting among the strategic point to invest for the future. But they could also form a path to measure the engagement of the public of the museum. And here again, however, the initiatives are tenuous, the issues are still poorly understood, and the politicians have not yet taken up these challenges. I would like also to say that it gives a vision of the public involved in a network of activities linked to the museum, which become a communicational system and open the vision of the museum related to its capacity to communicate and to capitalize on its public. So to conclude, I will just say a few words. I would like to say that there is no linear evolution of the status of a public that will only be an indicator of the vitality of the museum to a public that would become an actor of the change in the museum world. Both are existing and both are really important, especially in this pandemic time. It seems also to me very important to recall that the question of the production of museum data is very heterogeneous according to the country or according to the actors of its production, and that efforts must still be made to have a more global vision of this data about the public, of course, but more generally about the museum world. There are not, as we might think, linear development, increasing development of the knowledge we have about the museum world, which could be linked to economic and political decision too. It's also important to remind that the people who do this work of expertise, of collection of data or analysis are the basis of the good functioning of this work on the long term. But at the same time, Changes have to be taken into account in the field of museum statistics, and they depend on societal upheaval and technological change, and this reflection must not be put on the back burner. It's necessary to take hold of it now, and these future issues go beyond the observation of trend and will lead to structural change in the field of research, especially in the activity of museum data production. It's raising major questions about the formation and the future of the professional in these sectors. And finally, maybe we should consider the museum as a dynamic universe and no longer through some categorized set, which would be the means to achieve the outline of a development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Olivia. It's a big challenge again. I would like to wrap it up with the first challenge Anne Krebs put us today. So maybe we can join a task force to reinforce this idea to study better our audiences and take data to understand better how we want to perceive museums in the future. And in Europe, it could be done. Now, I would like to pass the word to a trio of three researchers from the Institute of, Institute for Development International Relations in Zagreb, Croatia. We're going to talk with Alexandra, Sania, and Suksana. I hope I said your names right. Please, Alexandra, the floor is yours. She's going to present a talk about how can we measure the social impact of cultural heritage intervention towards the holistic impact assessment model. She's going to talk. The floor is yours. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be the only one presenting, but there is a IRMO team that is working on this project. Thus, we are all three mentioned in the presentation. First of all, I would like to extend the organizers my thank you for organizing this very interesting conference, because the social responsibility of cultural sector is an issue that we are thinking more and more. And I would like to I appreciate the possibility to present the results of the SOFIA project that started a year ago. I will talk about current issues that we are dealing with and that are linked with measuring the social impact of culture, heritage interventions, and our efforts to define this holistic impact assessment model. So let me just briefly tell you who I represent here. I am representing the Horizon 2020 project SOFIA, which is short for Social Platform for Holistic Impact Assessment, Heritage Assessment. The way this project works, it is a social platform model of the project, kind of coordination support action that encompasses 7 consortium partners that work together with the community of stakeholders from different areas of culture that are interested in the impact assessment of culture heritage. And together we are trying to work in definition of the effective impact assessment models, proposing some quality standards, and eventually some guidelines for future policies and programs. We have responded to this particular call, whose main request was that we need to present that there was a need for new approaches, tools, and guidelines to evaluate such a multidimensional and holistic impact. So to respond to this request, we have set up the objectives through which we are working in this 2 years project. And we started with an extensive literature review about the issue of impact assessment and policies, research done about that in cultural heritage field. Based on this extensive literature review, we have identified what would be the main issues and existing gaps when the impact assessment is done on the intervention of cultural heritage. And the main task, in fact, of this project, the central task would be the development of the model for holistic impact assessment of interventions on the cultural heritage that encompass 4 interconnected domains, which is social, cultural, economical, and environmental. We are trying to propose some shared quality standards that are in fact needed to be in place for such things to happen. And eventually the project, in addition to this model, should produce a toolkit, a recommendation, policy paper, a number of outputs that would deal with the different aspects of the issues that we are researching. So in our research, we had to look into contemporary approaches to cultural heritage, but also we looked at in the new meaning of impact and the ways to assess impact of intervention in cultural heritage. So when we looked in the literature of the related to heritage research in general, it is quite visible that we all know that today we are dealing with value-oriented approach to in heritage discourse, and all this different literature emphasize the importance for heritage somehow to contribute to the EU goals for smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. So we analyze both academic literature and policy studies, and we have seen that in many documents there are emphasis put on heritage as a resource in social aspects of promoting social cohesion, diversity, intercultural dialogue, as well as economic aspects where heritage is seen as a resource for innovation and sustainable and inclusive growth. And more, that has also been mentioned today by previous speakers, well-being is an issue where also heritage is expected to contribute. So for such things to happen, there is an expectation for more socially responsible management and heritage literacy as important issues. And the expectation related to this that the heritage has to in fact adapt to the contemporary social needs, and some new business models should be proposed, some new management schemes. And when we are evaluating what we are doing in the cultural heritage, then it should be handled in a holistic manner, and not only from the perspective of a professional and experts, but where the other stakeholders that in fact are affected by the work of heritage-related projects are also should be present. In all this, community is being recognized as having an important role for cultural sector, and that better communication with them is something that needs to be done. So when we were talking about what is impact, we realized that there is absolutely the need to define, in fact, in the beginning, what kind of impact is sought from the intervention of cultural heritage. And as we responded to this call that's asked for multidimensional, holistic one, then we had to, of course, ask ourselves, what does this, in fact, will mean? As we are trying to work towards all this literature and research to propose some shared standards that will be useful for cultural heritage field in general. This project is not meant only for the museums. The call was framed in a general way. So our response to the call also had to be general enough to be able to propose a model that would be useful for equally heritage institutions, or maybe some let's say historical renovation of some cities, or very diverse heritage projects that are underway in Europe. Basically, what we are expecting is that if we are trying to achieve the high quality results, then the shared responsibility relies definitely on cooperation and participation. And for that reason, stakeholders are again important factor. When we were considering about impact assessment, it is not only, impact assessment does not equal evaluation. It is a little bit wider or different issue. But again, it is not one of things that happens, you do it and you have responded to some formal request to do it. It is something that would be useful to do before the project and maybe during intervention in order to be able to change it in the right direction, and afterwards to really see what would be the long impact. So we started with with the clarification of what needs to be clear before any assessment is done, and it is to respond to the range of questions like what are we doing, why are we doing it, how are we going to do it, for whom, by whom, when, how long, how much. All these questions are, of course, at the end, impacting of the result of any impact assessment that is being done. Reasons for doing that is to monitor, to get data in place, which is we have seen in our project so far that is quite problematic in different countries. So unless, in addition to this quantitative data that is sometimes present, sometimes not so much, evaluation by using the qualitative methods and the discussion with stakeholders proves very important, and all this and links them better with the project, as well as advocacy at the end is what we are trying to do, like to claim our better understanding of what is the cultural heritage place in society, and overall advancing of the knowledge about the field. So we started in our research from the previous results of the previous projects. So Cultural Heritage Council for Europe has proposed that in order to achieve some sustainable development, there is a need for a wider picture. So it is not only about the economical impact, but also the 4 domains that we have taken as a starting point: social, cultural, and environmental. And they have noticed that most of the evaluation that have been done is not holistic. They would focus on one of them. In their research, they say that only 6% of the studies cases that they have analyzed were holistic, taking on board the whole 4 domains. So in our approach in the project, we tried to find a new approach to reason about impact assessment, and we have decided to base the model that we are still building on 3 axes. One would be these 4 domains. Another would be the importance of multi-stakeholders profiles present in the project. And another one is also the time when something is being done, whether it is before the project, during, or continuously afterwards the project. And we have, of course, I mean, it is not that there are no methods. There are plenty of methods that we have found in the literature review in all 4 domains. But what is visible that there is a little bit of imbalance among them, and especially when economic impacts usually tend to be overemphasized, and their negative effects are usually underrated, while other kind of impacts like social one is not so much. I mean, it is like a side things in the, but what is measured is probably this, what was told, market failure, what is economically and possibly to put it in numbers. But if we are trying to achieve the multiple dimension of sustainability, then we consider that there is a need for a balance that has to be found, and any assessment methods that we are using should provide a balanced set of indicators for measuring success of heritage projects that are under evaluation. So we have made analysis of the gaps. We have made this for each of the 4 domains. So I'm just putting here some issue related to the social one. And what we have seen is that when we are trying to do the social assessment of the social impact, there is a present gap in what experts think and in what everyday people perspective is on the locality of the, let's say, heritage project. And this need for stakeholders to be involved is very much present, because they perceive value differently from experts, and this has to be somehow recognized in the projects that are being put in place for those stakeholders. And as there is this diversity of values by diversity of stakeholders, then there is no, it would not be appropriate to have one tool for everything, but somehow to bring a model that would allow some diversity of tool to be used depending on the particularities of a particular project. And also, when you are who is doing the evaluation is something very much important, because we also talked today about some biases, sometimes some are conscious, some are unconscious, who is doing evaluation, and the values that this person is bringing with them is also something to consider in such project. So we have tackled there that there are lots of gaps and inconsistencies. There is everywhere deficit in data, a lack of some concrete measures, some also capacity building of people who are doing this is something that has to be worked on. But the benefits, if this would be done, would enable better engagement and action with the public, and learning curve for the project themselves of the people who are doing it. We consider, so social impact is only one of the things in the model that we are developing, and the well-being is being more and more recognized as something that is valuable for both societies and for the individuals. And the expected effects would be the participation, better participation, and better sense of belonging to the place if it's let's say a small town, and kind of this informal learning and bringing people together to bring it closer to the projects that are being placed for them. So when we started developing the model, we were trying to somehow structure all these issues that we have found in the literature in some kind of more hierarchical way, so we can maybe develop teams and related sub-teams, and then list of indicators and method how to use these indicators in a project. As this is a work in progress, we still have almost a year to go and a lot of work to do. This is what I can share with you is only, in fact, the present state of our research. And this is the first draft where you see now only the topics, not the indicators, because it is a huge grid for us that we are developing. But this is only one layer of the model, because the model has to be a kind of tool for guided thinking when we are doing the research. And we have tested it. With the 12 case studies so far, to see how appropriate it is, how complicated it is to measure these things. It is not meant as a model. It is in fact meant as a meta model from which, based on your own goals that have been set up, when you are doing the evaluation, you choose according to the grid what is important for your project, what is in fact that your goals correspond to, and how you will be able to measure it. So this was meant as, but what was shown in these 12 case studies, when we showed them this grid, they started, it was also the learning opportunity for the people in the project, the stakeholders in the project, because they started considering some things that could be changed in the project and maybe made an impact where it was not initial plan to do that, because it was kind of also like a good educational moment for us. And so far, I cannot go through all these topics. It would be too long and not appropriate for this. But let's say our main directions in doing this project was that we understood the importance of complemented both qualitative and quantitative, because neither numbers can give us the full picture. Not only the people reaction can do that, because they can also be biased. And also it is not the issue of doing this once for formal purpose. It is a question that feeds back into the project and needs to allow the project to be adjusted accordingly. As it is as this model was meant for a broad set of heritage stakeholders, not only museum, not only particular type of institutions, then we had to start broadly with a broad set of topics and indicators, and then try to adjust this to a specific tool for a particular project in question that will need it. Also, this is the opportunity by doing such evaluation is to bring in dialogue the community with the governmental agency and with the project organizers that are important. So this is in fact the second phase of the project for us. And the third phase is very crucial phase for us, where we are in fact testing and bringing in stakeholders to comment, to contribute, to with their thinking, with their examples for the final model to be developed. So I would like to invite you, if you are interested in this topic, then this is the web page of the Sophia project. We are organizing several conferences, unfortunately digital ones, in the next months, where we are going to have a wide discussion with interested professionals in the field, hopefully making tool that would be useful for them to kind of broaden their view when they are evaluating the project. Thank you very much. I hope I wasn't long.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Alexandra. It was a great presentation, and we're looking forward to see the results of the Sophia project in the following months, and the results on the different partners as well. And now I would like to start a debate, or try to sum up all the different presentations we had this morning on the two parts. We started with Pirjo Amari from Finland, and then we had Anne Krebs from the Louvre Museum, and then we had Maria Amélia Coutinho Miranda from the Foundation and the Money Museum, and Mary Brulio from Malta. She was talking about the value of behavioral economy. And now we had three more presentations from the Observatory of Portuguese Cultural Activities, from Sorbonne with Olivia. She talked to us about the public as a main indicator for data providing for museums. And now Alexander summing up the Sophia project with all the different partners. So now we're going to open the floor for debate. Please, if you want to say a few, I would like to say a few things before presenting the rest of the panelists, trying to sum up all the different brilliant ideas you presented us this morning. So trying to make my notes a little bit not so tricky as they are here on my paper in front of me, trying to put this into some sense. The main ideas I would like to reinforce today. And I'm sorry if I cannot put everything in here, just trying to make a framework for the debate to follow as well. The idea that we need to develop projects based on research and action to test it rapidly, and not just doing research and not put it into action. This idea of research action that develops into a project and then it continues for many years, it gives results, even if at the first months or the first years are not so visible. And the idea then is also to scale up a little bit. The idea that we need to join efforts to compare these different approaches, different models, and these different tools and practices all over Europe. Maybe we need to start a dialogue and exchange more. The idea that we need to join effort to set up a blueprint, maybe for research audience, and how can we measure better the museum impact have in the communities, in the territories, in the people, and aiming for this impact outside. It's a very normal thing happens. The museum itself, it changes. The staff itself gains new skills. They also gain new ways to understand better. And it all goes back to this paramount idea that these museums started to be something, and now they are totally focused on being for somebody. And it changed the way the museum staff and the museum departments and the morphology of how museums are thought of as something quite, in order to try to make a impact outside, it has a profound impact on the museum itself. And I think I would like to reinforce that as well. This idea that we also need to set up a network on a European scale to profound research on museums and these different ways that we can perceive or imagine a future together with this diversity. And it's a dynamic society, and museums need to be more responsive in a way and be more in tune with the agendas for the future. This idea comes back to a thing that is quite core at museums. Museums need to revisit their mission statement in order to understand who they are, who they serve, and what's their purpose. And sometimes it's very hard to do for museums. These three questions are very hard to answer. The need that we need, I think we need to understand museums and the territories and the communities as dynamic, and the different stakeholders as a dynamic to set up these new models, this new research that I think we need to. There is a lot of things already going on, and we just shared a few here this morning and yesterday as well. But I think maybe we need to comprise a little bit more and exchange more and maybe learn from each other as well. So I'm giving the floor to any questions you would like to give us, or one of the speakers of the morning, please. Going to check up if there is something here. Do you like to comment on some of this sum up I've done? I'm sorry if I kind of made like a very nasty observation, but it's.
No, Soutor.
Not at all. Okay, you were very well. Can I speak in Portuguese? Yes, of course. Yes, with pleasure. I can hear the interpretation, and it's somewhat difficult. If you could keep down the volume of the interpretation. I agree with everything that you have said, not only what you have just mentioned, but also what my colleagues have mentioned. I think it was extremely important what happened at the Paper Money Museum, because it transformed the relationships that the museum had with the community completely. As you said, and rightly so, this work happened because right in the beginning, it had three essential factors. First, a research project made in collaboration with the academia, and this is a fact that I must reinforce. I think it is absolutely essential to start processes not only with the education services, obviously, but we also need to work with the academia so that the museum can question itself. The Paper Money Museum, of course, has this restlessness, and it led to question itself, but not only itself, but also the practices that could be improved regarding schools that it worked with and the audience that it had. And above all, it questioned the kind of sustainable relationships it could maintain or improve with the community, because the answers we were giving were not enough. So by thinking that, in fact, beyond its traditional functions that museums have, what is desirable is that collections be at the service of the population and the communities. They should be for that precisely, to be at the service of communities and to have an impact on them. And the issue is precisely this, which is how can we serve the community? For that, we need to be accompanied by universities. In the case of the Paper Money Museum, the Faculty of Economics in Porto, of the University of Porto, was fundamental. And then the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences, also of the University of Porto, to carry out all this assessment. Of course, there is another factor which is essential, which is the dynamization in a very broad way, as I said a while ago, to all partners in society, because we can only provoke a systemic change if we involve all the stakeholders of society. And this process that for 11 years the Paper Money Museum has been pursuing in this project and others has always been constructed along this paradigm to work with the university to ensure the quality of the project. And we need financial means, of course. They're always necessary and considerable ones, because such a process is long. It requires enormous effort. We invest a lot of money, energy, time. It is uncomfortable. We run many, many risks. And I wasn't able to speak about that early on, because in the beginning, it's very difficult to convince people to accept something simple like filling out a questionnaire. When we apply a pretest, people are a little bit uncomfortable, that they're suspicious. We had to overcome these barriers. We needed to say that it was anonymous. We don't want to know anything about their lives. We just wanted to measure aspects of the project. So this measurement of social impact is crucial, to measure the impact of projects within museums, and for museums to understand if they are in fact bringing a change socially, and if this is in fact positive. And for that, we will only know this if we have a measurement of impacts that is very well done with credible partners. Another success factor is that the partners be involved. They must be implicit and implied in the project. We must say that all stakeholders collaborate in this project aimed at schools, but there are others also aimed at the elderly, people with special needs. All of them collaborate actively, not only in the process, but also in the assessment. I think that these are success factors so that we can reach conclusions that, well, I was almost going to say daily, we integrated the fragilities that we detected. We integrated them on a permanent basis in the project. So our weaknesses became learnings, and this also made the project evolve a lot. If you were to ask me, is it complete? No, it's never complete. Thank you very much for your contribution. Let me leave you with one more question that we have just received.
Goals and the 2030 agenda be levered for the museums, for the mission of museums. How can they kind of align their activity and their how can we measure the real impact of implementing sustainable policies within the Agenda 2030 for the SDG goals? It's quite a bold question. I think there are some museums that respond to some of these 17 goals. Nonetheless, I would like to give the possibility for the other speakers maybe to think loud a little bit about this. How can museums align their action with the 2030 agenda? It's quite a bold question, isn't it? Yes, Pirio, please.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And of course, it is a very large question. When it comes to impact, I think one of the key issues at stake is that you have to have goals before you can demonstrate impact. You have to have a direction where you go, and then you compare from where you came to where you want to be. And that's how you measure. The measuring can also only take place when you have set the goals for yourself. So whether it's impact in terms of the SDG goals or impact at something else, the fundamental question is that the organization needs to set its own goals in these impact areas. That's one point I wanted to make. And the other, of course, is the general idea of where in the 17 SDG areas museums are operating. And of course, you can look at it in a very, very strict way, saying that, well, museums usually, or our area of operation is cultural heritage or culture in general. And of course, there are some targets in that area. But I think it's very worthwhile to remember that museums have the capacity to also promote all across the scale of the 17 impact goals or the SDG goals. So we should not forget that we have potential to address also those kinds of impact goals in the SDG, as for example, combating poverty or promoting biodiversity. And I think our biggest potential comes into play as actors, as media. Museums as media comes across the best by demonstrating that we have potential to help the society towards the SDG goals across all of the SDG goals. Of course, there are tools towards this. One mention could be made for the guide made by Henry McGee about how museums can implement the UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals. And there are practical guidance of how to do this. But maybe what I wanted to say is that we should not forget the other goals outside the cultural sustainability goals that are in the SDG map.
Thank you. Does somebody else want to address this issue? Yes, please.
Just maybe to say, yes, of course, there is a lot of work that is being done by UNESCO to collect the data. But, and very, very true is what Pirjo has said, that first you have to set the goal and then you can measure the impact. But basically you have to set the baseline. And then if you are measuring, then you need data. And this data is not only international, it's also national, local. And this is something that is missing everywhere. And this is, I think, the issue that somehow we have to improve this quantitative data collections across the Europe and on the different levels. If we are trying to advocate that we are promoting those goals, contributing to them, somehow this baseline from which we can start and say, look, it was situation in this year and after our project, it has maybe improved, you know, and it is not data related to culture. It is all you know, all the impacts that we are doing on society. So it is data elsewhere, which is not of the same quality everywhere. So I think this is one of the issues that has to be somehow improved for us to have a better evidence based of our contributions to the SDG goals. And these contributions should not be overemphasized, I think. I think we should be realistic, but we should also change our thinking, like inform ourselves and try to see how to tackle it, not as business as usual, but as a change of paradigm. That's what we have to do. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a kind of a call for a different mindset, if I read your words well. I would like also, José Soares Neves, do you want to... Queres saltar para a discussão e apresentar?
I'd like to go to come into the debate with some contribution. You're not forced to, of course, don't feel like it's an obligation. Well, I really agree with what has been said until now. I think it is very important. I am placing myself fundamentally on the national plan, but it is very important to understand the international plan and the European plan, particularly the importance of statistics and gathering the data, the comparable data that will allow us to understand the place where everyone is these several plans, national, international, local, etc., it seems very, very important the measurement of SDGs. Of course, these are very big goals. They are guidelines that guide us in terms of intervention, of course, in terms of political intervention, but also guide us in terms of the citizens' concerns. And from this point of view, of course, information production regarding data is very, very relevant. It is a very complex task. It has been highlighted. We all know this. But on the other hand, it is very important to maintain this attention, this focus, as you mentioned, and very well, this perspective of getting to know, to intervene. In other words, trying to have better knowledge, and that knowledge be shared with the professionals in museums particularly, because they are the ones who deal with the public in an ultimate analysis. So we need to articulate the action, the intervention, the relationship that professionals with museums and irrigate that practice with knowledge and other perspectives, namely the academia and research centers, as we've heard. They seem very, very important. Thank you.
Sorry. All across Europe, linked to museums can hold hands, and maybe in the new Horizon to Europe program, we have a good financial tool to set up a first approach to these different views and perspectives into a shared future on how can we measure the impact of museums across Europe. I'd like to all to continue with us. Now we're going to start in a few minutes the round table, which is going to be like a sort of a balance. And also the next step for the conference in Slovenia in the second semester. I don't know if David Guillaume and Alexandra are already available to join the discussion. And I'll also like to call Clara Camacho to join us for the round table. Nonetheless, I think we still have like 1.5 minutes if somebody else wants to add to the discussion or to this challenge that I've made directly to Anne Krebs and to Olivia and the other people around the research center. Of course, this applies also to you, José. Maybe we can all hold hands and start a bid to the Horizon Europe program.
Okay. Shall I make some comments?
Sorry? I didn't...
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so just some comments in order to enrich our discussion. I really appreciated the talks on the morning. My first comment and question regarding a more collective approach to museums and culture is that we have to pay attention and find a balance, because most probably the external values of museums and culture are very important today versus the intrinsic and traditional values of museums, which means that we're not going to become social workers or therapists. It is very important to assess the specificity of the museum. And what is surprised me generally is that we have today very good and strong links between mediators, interpreters, managers, and researchers. But there is a lack of discussion with the curators. There is a lack of discussion on those topics with the scientific bodies of the museum, which is, to my opinion, very important, because we do not have necessarily the same norms, values, and representation of the museum. Another point which is very important, because we are trying in France today with the body, the statistical body of the Ministry of Culture, to build a tool regarding big data. I must say that we have to pay attention that it's not only a belief about the revolution of big data, because it needs very strong computational and digital competencies, and museums do not have those competencies. And it poses a lot of problems in terms of data cleaning, data collection, property of those data, because most of the time they do not belong to the museum, they are not protected, and more importantly, that we have to take into consideration the data protection rules, which means that we do not have access to the most interesting parts of the practices. So it's a very challenging question. And it's not sufficient to say that it's an important question.
Quite right, and it's quite important to take into consideration these different aspects of the big data. And of course, museums are not the more suitable, how can I say, the more suitable partners to make this happen. We need to hold hands to the people who are the expertise in big data, which of course are not museums. Nonetheless, I would like to thank also your remark on this subject. And now maybe I think we are now over time, yeah? So we're going for a small recess. Thank you. See you in a few moments.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Hello, David and Alexandra.
Hello.
Nice to meet you again.
Nice to meet you too.
Well, we are reaching the end of our conference. You have already met David yesterday. David is the director of the German Museums Association and the chair of NEMO. And Alexandra is the president of the Slovenian Museums Association. Our partners in this challenge of organizing 3 joint conferences. And I would start with David, with the experience of organizing the first conference of this cycle. And after this 1.5 days of intense work, which would be the main takeaways of this Portuguese conference for you, David?
Thank you, Clara. Clara, first, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for this excellent conference. really the program, the talk, the technique, the translation, everything went extremely well. And so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I took a lot of takeaways. I have learned a lot. I have some open questions now for that will remain open, I think. But even if I learn a lot, I have some open questions. And for me, these open questions are my takeaway. I would like to give only two of them. Back to yesterday, Johannes Vogel said yesterday a very simple but important sentence, and this is one of my most important takeaway. He said, we should stop making exhibition for colleagues. And of course, the question is why, is how, not why, we know why, but the question is how. We should stop making exhibition for people thinking the same way like we do, but how to do that? And an important way is, and I have learned that today and yesterday, is to analyze how we think in the museums, in our ecosystems, and how people think outside of the museum. So we are all open for diversity, we are all open for diverse point of views, but we have to know these other points of view, to know the expectation of people, to know what happens outside of our bubble. And that leads to the next questions I take away about metrics, measurement, and evaluation. It's the question, the very general question, how to evaluate social impact in general, and especially in the museum field. We saw today a lot of very interesting examples and some data, but the question remains open. Alexandra Uzelak showed us a couple of minutes ago how complicated it is to create indicators for social capital, well-being, prosperity, attractiveness, etc. And Anne Krebs showed us earlier very clearly that the evaluation of the social impact is not only about what we achieved, but also what we don't achieve and the reason why we don't achieve something. She mentioned self-discrimination by possible visitors and also the selection bias to participation which are present in the museums and by partners. So evaluating the complexity and the diversity of cultural experience is and remains a huge challenge for the future. And I think it's only possible if evaluation becomes an essential part of museum activities. It means concretely every museum should lead at least visitors' studies. And if museums work together in joint evaluation networks like MOI. So I think we are on the right way, but to implement evaluation so massively and systematically in the museum sector, it will take time and it will take money. And I hope that museum won't be too affected by budget cuts after the pandemic to achieve this goal.
Thank you, David. Coincidentally, I also took note of one of the sentences of Johannes Vogel. I was trying to figure if it would be the same sentence. My sentence is, we don't need a renovated building, we need a different culture. So this sentence was really important for me in yesterday's works, and I match it with the concept of cultural democracy as explained by David Anderson and Paulo Pires Duval, among other speakers. And that leads me to the talks of tomorrow morning and the need of evaluation, the experiences and projects that were presented, both from museum colleagues and academia. I wonder if we will be able to build up the kind of networks we need to structure evaluation in our museums. Because as Anne Krebs stressed out, not every museum has the resources to implement evaluation. So we really need networks of museums and research centers to be able to do it. So,
but back to the question of social responsibility.
Yes.
In social responsibility, we have responsibility. And for me, it was very important to say, if we really want to responsibly have an impact, we have to evaluate it.
You are right. Yes, and I think this leads us to the conference in Slovenia, Alexandra.
Yes.
Following this Portuguese conference, which are your expectations, and what can you tell us about our next conference?
Of course, our expectations are very high, and I think that the expectations of all the people that attended this conference is very high, because congratulations to you, congratulations to Portugal. This was technically impeccable. You really set us some high standards, and I think that we all learned a lot. I wouldn't mind, considering what you said and what a colleague yesterday said, I wouldn't mind a renovated building, but I do agree that we do need socially responsible museums. And of course, a socially responsible museum is, for me, as a museum that is a part of society, not above it, or not just looking to society from inside the museum building and out. We do need to understand the world around us. We have to be a part of this world. This is a very important year for Slovenia and for the Slovenian Museum Association, not just because of this conference, because we are a part of these great joint projects of a conference organized by German Association and Portugal, but also because this year we are celebrating 30 years of independence of Slovenia and 200 years since the first museum in Slovenia was opened. So 2021 is going to be a great year. And Slovenian Museum Association is looking forward to welcoming you in Slovenia, in Maribor. And this is a country that is going to take over the presidency of the European Union in the second half of 2021. As we said, we are preparing for the conference on museum and social responsibility, which is going to take place on 23rd and 24th of September, and is going to unite speakers from everywhere. In Slovenia, we are going to open the topic of the green power of museums. Now, what do we think with the green power of museums? We are starting with a premise or a recognition that nearly all our green or ecological problems arise from social problems. That is why the deterioration of the world around us cannot be understood without dealing with the problems within society. Different conflicts from gender, race, economic, ethnic, and cultural are the base of some very concerning ecological problems. The future of our society and museums as such lies in the recognition of those problems and dealing with them. That is why our speakers from several countries all around the world are going to open a few topics. Social ecology and museums going green on one side, then right up to the question of the technology in museum, which was mentioned today as well. So digitization. There are going to be experts on climate change and the role of the museums, the implementation of Agenda 2030, question of ethics in museums, museums in activism, and process of rethinking our purpose and role in today's society. We, as an international community, museum community, are going to think and rethink our relationship with an ever-changing society, our future in the world going green, and the role of the new technologies in museums that are willing and ready to change the world around us. From activism to education to technology, we are going to be very socially responsible and, I hope, very interesting.
Thank you, Alexandra. I think you provoked in all of us the will to attend the Slovenian conference. Thank you both, David and Alexandra. Thank you for all your collaboration, enthusiasm. We have been very excited, the Portuguese team, organizing this conference with your support. And see you in Maribor. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Ciao.
Muito bom dia a todos. Dando início à ação de encerramento da Conferência Digital Museus e Responsabilidade Social e em nome da Direção-Geral do Património Cultural, a quem coube a responsabilidade de organizar esta conferência no âmbito do programa da Presidência da União Europeia.
The President of the EU, let me start by thanking the President of ICOM International for the presence and the Council of Europe and the Deputy Secretary of State and Cultural Heritage. Thank you all for your presence with some pity because we weren't able to be face-to-face. So I think that we needed to congratulate everybody for the way this event has run and all the speakers with all their availability and generosity shared with us the inspiring projects and innovative tools in the area of museums were in fact very interesting. In fact, yesterday and this morning we heard about participation, commitment, involvement, relevance, ethics, activism, transformation, so many important words. And we understood that we're not only in a moment of debating a new definition or vision for museums, we are in fact going through a profound change in the world of museums, which is not only due to the specific situations we're going through. Museums have their role by democratizing themselves and supporting a critical dialogue for the past and the future in an era in which, particularly in Portugal, we are preparing to open up our doors of museums for visitors. It is very gratifying to understand that it's not only the doors of the buildings that you are opening and the collections that you are making accessible, but you're also making available values like equality of rights, tolerance, social justice that are so important in the context of fighting movements of segregation and exclusion that we sadly have seen lately. We also see understandings of the world and planetary well-being, and it is with this note of hope and the growth of the relevance of museums and their role in the construction of a better future that I thank the more or less 700 participants in this conference, and I wish that the ideas spread here can flourish in the country, in Europe and the world, and I'm really anxious for September to listen to all these ideas in the conference in Slovenia. With these words, then, let me pass the floor to the President of ICOM International, Roberto Garlandini. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear Deputy Director General, dear Director General of Democracy, dear Secretary of State, dear friends and colleagues. Let me start thanking the Council of the European Union and the Portuguese presidency for inviting me as president of the International Council of Museums. It is a pleasure to be here with you and conclude the European Conference on Museums and Social Responsibility. In this two-day conference, we have discussed how museums can boost cultural participation, create new networks and reinforce older ones, build partnership, strengthening the social fabric. In less than 2 months, on May 18th, museums will discuss similar themes all over the world for the ICOM 2021 International Museum Day. As we hit the first anniversary of the beginning of lockdowns in Europe, the theme of 2021 Museum Day is the future of museums, recover and reimagine. ICOM invites museums, communities, cultural institutions, local governments to focus on the role of museums today and in the future. ICOM sends a powerful message. Museums are bridges between people and cultures. Museums promote participation and diversity. Museums innovate and experiment to respond to the social, economic, and environmental challenges of our troubled present. Museums are going through the most serious crisis in their modern history. ICOM's global surveys on the impact of the first and the second waves of COVID-19 have confirmed a widespread climate of uncertainty about the future. While some museums have reopened with major limitations, many others stay closed. 30% of museums fear downsizing and 6% a permanent closure. Many professionals, especially consultants and independent workers, often young and motivated colleagues, are facing furloughs and terminations. We are risking losing their knowledge and commitment, which would be a catastrophe. The loss of income due to the lockdown has been traumatic. Many museums will have to reconsider their business models and reinvent their social role. More than 50% of museums all over the world complain that so far they have received neither direct nor indirect financial support from governments. While museums are places of participation, intercultural dialogue, social inclusions, and reconciliation, as much as institutions of conservation, communication, exhibition, and education. In a scenario marked by the crisis of mass tourism, fewer resources, and persistent sanitary restrictions, professionals are working hard to reassure governments and citizens that visiting museums is as safe and rewarding an experience now as it has always been. The pandemic has dramatically increased inequalities. In a world where 41% of the population are not active internet users, digital illiteracy and the lack of digital infrastructures have widened disparities in access to culture and heritage. Participation means providing access to culture and heritage to all citizens with no discriminations. Participation means the active involvement of citizens. Communities not only ask to be consulted or listened to, Communities demand to be involved in decision-making, content development, and definition of priorities. Free access to culture is one of the human rights recognized by the United Nations Universal Declaration and by UNESCO's Declaration on Cultural Diversity. Participation is at the core of the 2005 European Faro Convention on the value of cultural heritage for society. Access to culture is an indisputable key indicator of social equity and well-being. Such social approach is not new for museums. In 1972, UNESCO and ICOM organized the Santiago de Chile Round Table, a milestone in the history of museology. The Round Table launched the social role of museums and proposed a vision of museums as institutions working with local communities and promoting democratization, development, and quality of life. Since then, eco-museums and museums of all kinds and locations have promoted the participations of citizens. The role of museums in society has become more important than ever. The COVID-19 has led museums to accelerate change and explore new solutions to transform the emergency into a catalyst for innovations. Digitization and new hybrid forms of cultural experience and dissemination have been developed. Museums have strengthened their digital outreach and improved their credibility and reputation. Museums have proved that they may be a driving reference for citizens in time of uncertainty, isolation, and fake news. In times of crises, networks and global cooperation are indispensable. This was the idea behind the 2018 partnership between ICOM and the Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development. The partnership between a cultural non-governmental association like ICOM and an economic governmental organization like OECD produced the guide for local governments, communities, and museums to maximize the impact of culture and heritage on local sustainable development and well-being. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen museums reinvent their educational partnership with schools and provide online innovative learning opportunities. We have seen museums cooperate with local health administration to provide vaccination sites. 2021 is a pivotal year for society. ICOM calls museums to face the challenge and lead the change. Without culture or education, without museums or cultural institutes, there is no future. Now is the time to improve museums' relationship with the communities they serve and reaffirm the essential value of museums for the construction of a just, sustainable future. Now is the time to take new responsibilities, the time for unity and cooperation. As ICOM founding fathers stated in 1946, only together will we be able to move forward. Thanks for your attention.
Muito obrigada. As preocupações.
The concerns and ICOM's fears are ours as well. Let me pass the floor to the Director General of Democracy of the Council of Europe, Zuzana Markovic.
Hello from sunny and nice Strasbourg to everybody. And I would express my really pleasure to be with you today at this important reflection session about museums and social responsibility. Like many speakers before, I believe the pandemic has in many ways helped to underline the importance of our cultural institutions and their contribution to a flourishing cultural scene for the quality of life of citizens. Museums have suffered heavily, as we have heard from the president of ICOM. But they have also found the new ways how to reach people from all walks of life, including the young, the elderly, and the vulnerable. Museums play a special role in the cultural landscape, including from a Council of Europe perspective. Let me start with a few thoughts about part-taking. Citizens' participation has become an ethical obligation and a political necessity. It revitalizes society, strengthens democracy, and fosters coexistence. Participation in cultural life is a fundamental right of every citizen, which also entails the duty and responsibility towards the protection and preservation of cultural heritage for its full enjoyment. As an important cultural player, museums may welcome visitors and users rather than more spectators, and they can engage them actively beyond simple entertainment. It is essential for museums to put people at the center of their actions and place human rights and values in focus of their work, as emphasized by Orhan Pamuk, the literature Nobel Prize winner, in his modest manifesto for museums. I will just quote: "The small museums in the back streets of European cities led me to realize that museums, just like novels, can also speak for individuals. The measure of a museum's success should also not be in its ability to represent a state, a nation, or company, or a particular history. It should be its capacity to reveal the humanity of individuals." So I end my quote. When speaking about culture, participation and social responsibility of cultural institutions, we can mention two Council of Europe instruments of particular relevance. The one is a European Cultural Convention from 1954, which aims to develop mutual understanding among the peoples of Europe and reciprocal appreciation of their cultural diversity. The convention still serves as a framework for action of Council of Europe in the cultural field for the 47 member states of our institution, and together with Belarus, the Holy See, and Kazakhstan. So really, it's a big scope. Then the second very important instrument, which was mentioned also before, a more recent one from 2005, is the Faro Convention of the Value of Cultural Heritage for Society, which, as we have heard, offers an inspirational framework to engage civil society actively in decision-making process related to cultural heritage. In the Faro Convention, what is important are the meanings that heritage objects and sites represent to people. This highlights the concept of utility of cultural heritage for citizens, rather than placing the accent simply on protection and preservation. So the usefulness of heritage in people's everyday lives makes engagement meaningful if they are attached to it and don't just protect and preserve. Another case exemplifying action in the European Museum of Year Prize, which has been awarded under the auspices of the Cultural Committee of our Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe in 1977. Recent winners include the Gulag History Museum in Moscow, Russian Federation, then the National Museum of Secret Surveillance, House of Leavers in Tirana, Albania, and the War Childhood Museum in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Such choices emphasize the link between museums and human rights and their important role in going beyond keeping past memories in order to discuss the contemporary challenge, such as freedom of expression, freedom of speech, fighting discrimination, ensuring the rule of law. Those subjects are, of course, very important and are at the very heart of the Council of Europe mission. Now, the future. Thinking further about social responsibility, community involvement, and museums, it seems to me important, like 5 or 6 elements. First, to overcome the perception of museums in purely economic terms. Museums actively contribute to cohesive societies as places of dialogue for different cultures and different points of view. Second, culture and heritage offer people a sense of identity, often multiple identity and overlapping identities. And they give to the people sense of belonging to a community, which in turn contributes to stronger cohesion, social proximity, better mutual understanding. As major actors of the cultural heritage sector, museums must assert a key role in achieving such goals. Third, the museums reflect rich and dynamic changes to the environment and contain objects that convey a unique story of humanity. They represent a window into the values and actions of past historical periods and historical and sociological ideas of the communities. Secondly, this is a fourth, meaning. A bit of change is needed in the structure of museums. Museums might become less hierarchical and more horizontal and adapt to the changing profile of visitors in order to fulfill their social role in the best positive way. Museums may put community needs at the top of their agenda if they wish to remain relevant and articulate their further value as transforming agents of communities. And to sum up, it seems to me that in the future, museums must play a crucial role in developing more cohesive and inclusive societies, as I said, servicing as a space for intercultural dialogue, participation, community action. They must reflect the right to participate in cultural life, ensuring democratic societies, but go even further, contributing to quality of education, cultural dialogue, sustainable development, and the economy. Museums have a great potential to raise public awareness and value of cultural and natural heritage and of the responsibility of all citizens to care for it, like it is mentioned in Sustainable Development Goals. Museums must continue to embrace new solutions using the latest technologies and contribute to overcoming the digital divide and unequal access to internet, which are hampering, as we have just heard, participation in culture. Critical media and information literacy is key to the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you will agree that this has been a very rich and worthwhile conference. I will be happy to learn about the follow-up to this very important event. And let me express my gratitude on behalf of Council of Europe and all our stakeholders and my colleagues too. Gratitude to the Portuguese authorities to organize such an important conference, and my gratitude to all participants for sharing their experiences with us. So with this, I thank you again for the opportunity for the Council of Europe to participate in the conference.
Thank you very much for your words. Então, para encerrar esta conferência, vou passar então agora a palavra.
Now I will pass on the floor to close the conference to the Secretary of State of the Cultural Heritage. Dear Rita Geronimo, Deputy Director General of the Director General of Cultural Heritage, dear Alberto Garlandini, President of ICOM International, dear Snezana Markovic, Director General of the Democracy at the Council of Europe, thank you very much to every attendee through the digital means. With her usual humor, Gertrude Stein once wrote that a museum should not walk slowly, but never stop walking. The same can be said about what is expected of a lecturer, especially in these circumstances in which I find myself. In these last 2 days, we have walked slowly but steadily through one of the central and fundamental themes of cultural heritage. At the same time that the modern ideas of freedom and democracy were beginning to define within the Enlightenment, the history of modern museums started as a space of instruction through the presentation of objects. The museum is a quibus labeling of the way we came to build democracy, freedom, diversity, and active participation of each in social and political life. Academic and legal definitions have this idea, but it was perhaps literature that best expressed the people when Orman Pamuk wrote that true museums are places where time becomes space. This expression is full of outcomes, not only in the sense that museums transform the past into galleries and corridors of cultural objects that signify, explain, or make known that time that was, but also because they must act, dialogue, problematize, and question the time they live and the time that is yet to live, to transform the time into an open space capable of dialoguing with everyone and not presenting a single and unequivocal truth. But this idea reminds us that time is not only transformed into space, but into a diversity of spaces, in the sense that the museum's responsibility is to the community, from the broadest to the broadest that this term allows, with the trends, national and international trends. Museums are by nature and mission open spaces to the public, places that can be visited and that welcome. Like no other institution, museums present the ideal of an accessible, democratic culture focused on preserving heritage and promoting personal development. Museums are at the forefront, are first and foremost at the service of culture and the history, be it as an institution, committed institution that listens to communities, that questions itself and learns to find solutions. Like museums time. In our action, these ideas should become specific policies in this period. In Portugal, we created a project group, museums in the future for the future, and public policies both in the short term and for the next 10 years. The recommendations of this group divided into thematic axes focus on what was the sub-theme of this conference, networks and partnerships. On this aspect, I would like to emphasize the importance that could be given to the network of museums. Its role will be widely enhanced. The larger and more comprehensive partnerships between public and private sectors are, the greater the involvement of civil society and academia in the development of the tasks that traditionally are assigned to them. I take this opportunity to say that yesterday and today we were like a museum. We were strategically an open space, the result of an intention that turned into transnational cooperation and that will continue to make this theme one of the axes of the 3 consecutive presidencies of the Council of the European Union, Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia. So I'd like to thank everyone participated in this conference, and also the public that shows the growing interest in the topics discussed. The speakers, the extended community of sharing around museums they witness. The discovery is only materialized in the making known, and therefore a special thanks to those who organized and made known this conference, to the General Director of Cultural Heritage and the team that over the last months who, in a complex and unprecedented context, has made it possible to make known the themes that were discussed. I would like also to make a special reference to the partnerships of NEMO and the Slovenia Museum Association. These initiatives started at the top of the European agenda for cultural heritage, one of the Portuguese priorities for this semester, and which will also be followed up at the council level. Museums offering justice to the etymology of of its name are the place where culture reaches its broadest and most consequential meaning, where cultural heritage is memory, but also an encouragement to artistic creation and to scientific and technological development. We have long known that it is in the city and in the community that each of us reaches the fullness of our lives. We have demonstrated that museums are a place where culture reaches its fullness. Thank you very much to all of you.